Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Welcome, everyone, as you're joining us to the Community IT Innovators webinar on startup and spinoff nonprofit IT. We know that planning for IT can be overwhelming, or you might not know where to start. And there are so many IT tools available now that weren't available 10 to 20 years ago, so that if you are a startup nonprofit, you're probably able to do a lot of your IT yourself. But as you grow, and we hope you grow, there will come a point where you will have to either hire someone to build your capacity internally to handle your IT, or outsource some or all of your IT support. And there are many things you can do in the startup phase to prepare for that development. So we're going to talk about that today. And on the other hand, we see a lot of prospective clients who come to us as they spin off from another organization, maybe a university incubator, a fiscal sponsor, or maybe you were in a coalition doing your admin needs together, including your IT. And when you spin off can be the first time you realize that the IT that you need, and you realize you have to start making your IT decisions yourself and untangle your organization from whoever was providing your IT before. So it can be an opportunity, but it can be challenging. And if you're in either situation, a startup or a spinoff, we're glad you joined us. And maybe we can give you a framework on how to think about your IT support as you grow. I'm Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT, and I'm the moderator today. Before I came to Community IT, I was an IT director at large and small nonprofits. So I've been through this from the client side too. I was in a position where I managed an outsourced IT provider at a large nonprofit, and many of our grantees were startups. So I saw all kinds of different IT arrangements, some successful and some like really chaotic. And before that, I worked at a small nonprofit in DC that had a fiscal sponsor in California. So we had to handle all of our own IT. And I have to say, we got very little guidance from that organization that was our back office. They did multiple trainings on building our board, our HR, how to keep our books, but really nothing on IT or cybersecurity. We were on our own. So I'm happy to be here with you today to talk to Johan about what he's seen in clients that helped them be successful as they grew and where some of the pitfalls might lie. So Johan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this webinar. We're glad you could make it. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO of Community IT. I have been here for a long time, over 20 years. I've worked with hundreds of nonprofit organizations in that time, including a lot of organizations that were just starting up or in the middle of spinning off from their parent organization. And so this is a topic we've been talking about for a while, and excited that we're finally presenting it today on the webinar.
Thanks, Johan. So before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. We provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We're big fans of what well-managed IT can do for your nonprofit. We serve nonprofits across the United States, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. We are technology experts, and we are consistently given the MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, managed services provider, which is an honor we just received again in 2023. So I want to remind everyone that for these presentations, Community IT is vendor agnostic. We only make recommendations for our clients and only based on their specific business needs. And we never try to get a client into a product because we get any kind of incentive or benefit from that. But we do consider ourselves a best of breed IT provider. So it's our job to know the landscape, what tools are available, reputable, and widely used. And we make recommendations on that basis for our clients based on their business needs, their priorities, and their budget. So we had several questions in registration about starting a nonprofit. And I just want to clarify, today we're going to talk about our area of expertise, which is IT support for new nonprofits. But if you haven't started your nonprofit yet, I'm going to put some resources in the chat and they'll be in the transcript about that part of the process. So in the United States, there's the Council of Nonprofits, which has a lot of resources on running a nonprofit, including starting one up. And that is councilofnonprofits.org. And your city or town may have a nonprofit resource center, or your public library also might have some resources to help walk you through the paperwork and the setup that you need to do. If you're joining us internationally, you'll need to check with your own government about their regulations for starting an NGO. And in addition to the free resources on our site about IT, our friends at TechSoup also have lots of information on free and low-cost technology tools for new nonprofits. And they have a library of online courses as well that you can take to improve your management of IT, including a Cybersecurity 101 course that Community IT provided for them. And that is www.techsoup.org. All right, so I'm going to go over our learning objectives for today. We want to help you learn typical IT concerns for startup and spin-off nonprofits. We want to learn best practices as you go out on your own, understand evolving security needs as you grow, and learn a couple of IT leadership tips, even if you aren't the IT person. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the IT needs that you have as you grow. We've talked a lot at Community IT about these different kind of size ranges that it's not always the case that clients and prospective clients fall in these exact categories, but in general, the size of your organization can, there's just some natural ways of managing IT that fall into those different size categories. So do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah. So like you were saying, Carolyn, these are not exact definitions in the sense that you could be a startup or a spinoff with over 100 staff. You could be a mature organization with only 15 staff. So these are not hard and fast definitions, but they're kind of general rules of thumb that we found, broadly applicable. And I think, you can consider your size as well as the age of the organization, as you think about the different kinds of IT support that you need. So let's actually we'll start at the bottom with, what we're calling the startup organizations, fewer than 5 staff. At that size, the focus is really on, the organizational priorities, sort of getting the organization off the ground, starting to work on developing your program, securing your funding sources. Very little work is really going into organizational development itself. You don't have a complex hierarchy. You may not even have any kind of like management supervision structure. There's probably one person who, oversees the whole organization and makes all of the decisions. So in an environment like that, it's important that your IT is secure and that it's meeting the needs of the staff. But generally with smaller organizations and with startup organizations, there's sort of an expectation that everybody is going to be resourceful in all kinds of different ways. You have to be resourceful to keep an organization like that running, and that's going to extend to IT. So at that size, we typically recommend not working with a full-on outsourced service provider like Community IT, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that entails on the next slide. But generally, if you have someone in the organization who is pretty good with technology, who can figure out, the basics of administering either, your Google Workspace or your Microsoft 365 account, that's probably sufficient. That's probably going to meet the needs of the organization at that size. And you save a lot of resources, not trying to outsource overall IT management. I guess a good way to think of it is the organization is small and doesn't need much in the way of management. And the IT, by the same token, also doesn't need much in the way of management. You need the IT to work. You need someone to be able to set it up and configure it and resolve problems when they arise. But beyond that, it's pretty simple at that stage. You can try to cover that need in-house. Like I said, organizations of that size, people are wearing a lot of different hats. And if there's someone who can put on and wear the IT hat, by all means, let them do that. If there isn't, we typically recommend working with an independent contractor at this stage. Independent contractors tend to be less expensive than a full-service IT support company. They also tend to be more flexible, and they just are a better cultural fit for organizations at that size. A partial exception might be organizations, nonprofits, for whom technology is a core part of their program. So that's organizations that are doing data collection, data analysis, and data reporting. Maybe they're collecting health data and then aggregating that and reporting on it, and that's a core part of their program. That's kind of an exception in the sense that if that's your mission as an organization, one of your first 5 staff is probably going to need to be someone who's an expert in data management. Hopefully that person could then also sort of pitch in on the IT side because they're, technically proficient and they probably have experience working with technology. So that's in the startup space size range. And then you've got spin-offs, and we're saying that's like 5 to 15 staff. And oftentimes organizations will incubate as part of a larger organization or as part of a university department or program or as a program in a much larger nonprofit organization. And that organization will provide support as they move through this startup phase and move into more of the spin-off phase. But it could also be an organization that sort of made it out of the 5-person range and is really starting to develop itself and the programs that it's delivering. So in the spin-off phase, and I think the organization again provides a really good analogy. At that point, you probably have 1 or 2 people or 3 people in management and supervision roles, who are approving, time off, making decisions about salary, making sure that the organization is following its policies, starting to develop policies for the organization. So there's a growing sort of management need for the organization. And in the same way, there's kind of a growing management need with the IT that the organization is using. And so somewhere in the 10 to 15 person range, it starts to become too complex to try to manage all of the machines that people are using in an ad hoc way, to try to manage all of the accounts that need to be set up for your staff in an ad hoc way. So as you move into the spin-off phase, it's important to start thinking about what's the long-term plan for the organization, what size do you anticipate the organization growing to, and what IT is going to be required to support an organization of that size. So start that planning process when you get into the spin-off stage. Start thinking ahead to the future and making decisions at this stage that will set you up for success down the road. And we'll talk about that in more detail later on in the presentation. Then you get up into the 15 to 100 stage sized organization. At that point, the organization has more advanced management requirements. You're developing a hierarchy, you have an org chart, most likely, different business functions that the organization has around fundraising, program delivery, operations, legal, financial management. All of those are now turning into teams or departments. You need to start having more control over the information that people in the organization have access to. And that's the point at which you really need to have a well-run IT management function that sort of isn't just providing IT services to the organization, but managing how those services are used. And we'll talk a little bit more about different options for doing that. At that stage, it does make sense to start working with a managed services provider. Organizations can also build that capacity in-house, and there are some different factors to consider when thinking about that decision. And then finally, mature or very large organizations that have more than 100 staff, we strongly recommend organizations in that size start to build out their own in-house IT capacity. In every one of these size ranges, there is someone in the organization who needs to own IT. So, and that applies to all functions, right? Like somebody needs to own HR, somebody needs to own legal, who's making sure that the contracts the organization is entering into are in the best interest of the organization. That doesn't mean you need to be a lawyer, but somebody is playing that point of contact role with the counsel that's supporting the organization. And in the same way, someone needs to play that point of contact role with whoever the IT support provider is. So at some point, most likely when you hit, the 100 staff range, you really need to have the owner of IT be someone who comes from an IT background, an IT professional whose full-time responsibility for the organization is around overseeing IT. So now there's some cases where that is an important role to have for much smaller organizations. And I suppose there are cases where I'm struggling to think of one. I guess theoretically there could be a case where a larger organization doesn't need that as a specific role, but it's hard for me to imagine what that would be. I think once you're heading in the direction of 100 staff, you really need to be thinking about building out your IT team in-house.
Yeah, I think we also talked earlier about if you have multiple offices, although I think that's, like a lot of people are working remotely now, but yeah, if you have more than one office, just your IT needs are going to be more complex because of that as well, for sure. Okay, so our next question, Johan, is what is a managed services provider?
Yeah, so managed services provider is a very specific type of IT support provider. And there's been kind of an evolution over the last 25 years in how IT support is provided by third-party firms like Community IT. And for a long time, the approach was break fix, which was basically you pay someone to come in and set up your computers and your information systems. And then when they break, you call that same provider to come and fix the machines once they've broken. And that was kind of the original model for IT services back in the 90s and into the early 2000s. And then that was, I don't know if it was replaced because there are still firms that provide that type of support. But then an additional model was created called value added reseller, or VAR, where they would sell the equipment directly and then include support of that equipment as part of the contract, the long-term support contract. But one thing you note in these models is that they're really equipment centric. They're focused on the equipment, set it up, fix it, sell it, make sure it's running. And as we've all learned, IT is about so much more than the equipment. In fact, the equipment is really there to kind of facilitate the use of these information systems that help make the staff and the organization as a whole more productive and in doing the work that they do. And so that whole model of break fix and adding support onto the sale of hardware, it was lacking because it wasn't really providing organizations what they really needed, which is the management of IT systems and equipment over time. And so that's really where the managed services provider model came from. And nowadays, if you're looking for IT support, you are almost certainly going to be considering a firm that offers some version of managed services. And so we all call ourselves managed services providers. So the chances are, if you're working with an IT company right now, they are an MSP, and that's the industry that we all consider ourselves to be in. So some of the things that make MSPs unique and different from break fix and value added reseller is that they're very proactive. The managed services provider should be providing proactive network management. So monitoring all the machines, applying patches in an automated way, proactively. A good managed services provider will meet with you on a regular basis, will want to understand what your business needs, your organizational priorities are, and help you think through how to align your information systems with those organizational priorities. So they're proactive in that way as well. Almost every MSP offers a help desk that you can call to get support, and the help desk is relying on the proactive management tools that the provider is got in place for the organization to provide support. So it's a model that's more sort of advanced and sophisticated, and it requires more upfront investment, but the long term, the goal is to be less expensive than break fix, because you're not usually when something's broken, it's more expensive to replace it. So you're not waiting for things to break. You're keeping them running so that they won't break. But more importantly than it being less expensive is that it ends up creating IT that's more effective, that has a greater impact on what the organization is trying to do, because the systems are well tuned to meet the needs of the organization.
So we have a couple more resources on our website about this specific question of how to select an MSP. And I want to make sure everyone knows that it's not always us. It's, we hope that it is, but we really put a lot of time into building good relationships and partnerships with the clients that we interact with. And as Johan was talking earlier about the slide and the size, like there are some nonprofits that aren't a good fit for this model. So it's important as you're going forward to choose to think about some of these ways to make sure you're getting an MSP that will be a good fit. So Johan, I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about this, and I'll put a couple of the links to our other resources in the chat.
Yeah, and I think the resources that we have, like we have a questions to ask a potential managed service provider that you're considering working with. That really outlines a lot of the areas that we recommend organizations look at when they're evaluating managed services provider. I think one of the key requirements is being able to. So this kind of goes back to the real value that a managed services provider delivers is around aligning IT with the organization's priorities and program objectives, mission objectives. And that alignment only happens through a collaborative process. So the managed services provider has to understand what your organizational priorities are, and then has to be able to articulate how their IT recommendations help you meet your organizational priorities. If that conversation isn't happening, if the managed services provider can't articulate how IT is going to help you accomplish your organizational objectives, then it's very difficult for you to establish an effective partnership with that organization. And that needs to start in the sales process, in the evaluation process. See if they ask you what your priorities are. Are they asking you about how you do your work? Are they asking you about anything beyond the nature of your IT systems? And then, pose technical questions to them. Any problems that you might be currently experiencing as an organization, share those problems with them and see if they understand what you're talking about, and see if they can articulate a possible solution or how they think about that sort of problem. So that partnership and that ability to collaborate around IT is really essential. And oftentimes partnership is about the intangibles. Are they a good fit for the personality of your organization? And not every provider is a great fit, for how different organizations work. So be mindful of that, kind of partnership, the vibe you're getting from the meetings that you're having with them. Are things clicking? Are you speaking the same language? Are they getting you? Or is it just like not, just not flowing? Listen to those sort of intangible things, because those are really kind of the essence of a successful IT partnership. Being able to solve technical problems, that's table stakes. In general, most MSPs that are in business these days are able to do that. Otherwise, they would have gone out of business. But you can check with their references. Make sure that they have, that they're strong in the area of IT. But like I said, those are table stakes, and the key differentiator is that ability to form a partnership. Look at the leadership, who's managing the MSP, and then also look at the ownership. And this is something that's been there's been a huge change in the MSP industry over the last 5 to 10 years, where a lot of the MSP, it's an interesting industry because it's dominated by small companies that have, less than 40 staff. And most of those firms are owned by a single owner. And many of those owners are getting close to retirement age. So one of the trends that we've noticed in the MSP industry over the last 5 to 10 years are these small business owners looking to sell, basically like they're looking to sell and retire. So they want to get value for what they've built in their business. And at the same time, there's a lot of private equity funding coming into the MSP space. And that's causing this, kind of these roll-ups to happen where a larger MSP will seek to acquire a lot of smaller MSPs so that they can then go out and get private equity funding. That can be a challenge because oftentimes when a smaller MSP is acquired by a larger MSP, they cut the services, they change up the support model, and as the ownership of the MSP changes, the priorities of the MSP change as well. So that's something to be mindful of. Like I would always ask if I were evaluating managed services providers, who owns the company? What are their 5 to 10 year plans for the business? Because we've worked with a lot of organizations that had an MSP that they loved, and then the MSP ownership changed, and there were significant issues, and to the point where they ended up having to find a new provider.
And that's always a painful situation. So it's good to know that that's a great question to ask when you're interviewing your MSP options.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.